Second speaker, trying to give a brief overview today. Get into some discussion on the third panel. So each panel member here will introduce themselves and give their background. From their initiative by first-hand information on health. We've seen a lot of information coming from the state and other local media, so they want to organize a panel to provide information on this.
It's Jay. Good to see everyone here and be here this morning on the McGirt panel. Got my own head, I think, about some of that. I'm not talking to myself at all. I want to thank the school for organizing this event and the work that they've done, and so thank you all very much. I know you're recognized. I'd like to thank you all myself. It's great work. I'm glad to stay involved with you. In terms of introduction, James, the former president of the Nation, from participated in leading up to the McGirt decision were under my administration, and so I'm pleased that you still have time for various things. I think probably the thing that takes most of my time right now, I'm a board member of the National Parks Conservation Association. I think probably the thing that takes most of my time right now, stay involved with board member issues regarding National Parks Association. And I hope stay involved and focus on the southeast regarding national homelands. So been involved with the Oklahoma Mountains expansion, and focus on the southeast studies that are going on down here, and hopefully some of the eventual version of it as a national park expanded for the studies that are going on down to 50 miles. So the great project version of it as a national park and expanded. I'm also serving as an advisor 50 miles, which is a great project, and so that keeps me up to date on also serving issues in Indian country and several matters in some tribes. Kind of how I spend my time, keep me up to date on Tulsa and Indian country, Creek Reservation. So kind of how I spend my time. Otherwise, I live means of Tulsa and on the Creek Reservation. If you want our opening statement at this time, that's by means of introduction. That's who I am. I don't know if you want our opening statement at this time, or that could come later.
I'm Chief Richard Phillips, Light Horse Police. I've been in law enforcement for approximately 23 years. I'm Chief Richard Phillips, Light Horse Police. I've been in Light Horse enforcement for approximately 23 years. 2021, I've been the Chief Light Horse end of December 2020. I was a captain of the tribe, but I spent the extent of my career with Light Horse as a reserve. I stayed in reserve here, but I worked for other agencies as a full-time officer with Light Horse as a reserve. I trade a bit of well. I stayed in reserve here, but I worked for other agencies. Guess the creator seen fit to take me down this path a bit of welder. And I'm thankful for it. Thankful to work for our tribe. Creator seen fit to take me down this path. And I'm thankful for it. Thankful to work for our tribe and our reservation.
Thank you. My name's Jeff Fife. I'm the Chief of Staff for Principal Chief Hill. I'm glad that our leadership and our student body has taken this moment to capture important matters that affect our community. Short background, I'm an alumnus of this college. I have a bachelor's degree from Oklahoma State, a master's degree from Southeastern Oklahoma State. My career began in law enforcement. Similar to Chief Phillips, I didn't have a clue that's what I would enjoy, but I did. I enjoyed it thoroughly. It placed me amongst our people on a daily basis. And that sense of community, communal caring, taking care of our people. That's a strong bond that I developed, not just professionally, but personally. Grew up in Okfuskee County, north of Dustin. That was previously known as Pokogie. We were the last ones to arrive. Today, national attention is brought to our panel, and this is an esteemed panel. Former Chief Floyd, Chief Phillips, Ms. Nagel. To have this body before you shows the growth of our tribal college. It shows that our professors are encouraging thinking beyond the moment. Hopefully, as we move forward, we'll be able to hit on a few things that show where we will go as people. With that, I wouldn't take any more time of this panel and pass it to Ms. Nagel.
Osio naga gohin dawanton jaleka yetli gela Gali Aliga Jige Donha. Hi, my name is Rebecca Nagel. I'm really happy to be here. I'm a citizen of Cherokee Nation and I live in Tahlequah, Oklahoma. So I'm just really honored that among all of these esteemed leaders of Muskogee Nation that you guys would invite me to also participate in this panel. I'm a journalist and I've been covering the Murphy and McGirt cases for a few years now. For a podcast called This Land and also for some different news media like Indian Country Today and The Atlantic. And I just really want to thank PTK and the students for putting this panel together. I think it's a really important conversation. I think, if you watch Channel 6, there's a lot of misinformation in Oklahoma about what the impact of the decision has been. And I think it's really important for our communities that are most directly impacted by it to know what happened and what it was. But I think it's also important for the broader public to have that understanding. So I'm just really humbled and really glad to be here.
Okay. Thank you all for coming once again. We really appreciate it. I appreciate your introduction from what you said about us. For a brief introduction, my name is Alyssa Lynn and I am this chapter's president of PTK. We have worked very hard to bring this together, and with that being said, I guess we can just get started with our questions. We have prepared these beforehand, so we've put a lot of thought into this. And our first one will be addressed to all members of the panel, so you are welcome to give any response as you wish. So, question 1 says, some assume that because of the McGirt decision, all criminal indigenous cases will be automatically overturned. Please give factual commentary on this. You may address any other myths and misinformation in your response.
That is in fact not true. With the state, they did recognize where that freedom of those cases were still going to be tried through the state law. Now, as far as ours, they'll go through the due process through our Attorney General's office and with our courts, and then the rulings will be made depending on either Indiana or maybe
I would concur with Chief Phillips. Categorically and statistically, that's inaccurate information that all cases are automatically overturned. The process, as it has been since the inception of the Major Crimes Act, allows for different avenues of judicial processes to fill gaps in the system. I'm certain some cases are dismissed or overturned. Those, however, are not uncommon to the pre-McGirt practices of the judicial system. There's discretionary opportunity or discretionary authority instilled in district attorneys. Those discretionary authorities are placed within tribal prosecutors. U.S. attorneys, they also have the same authority. So to categorically say that all indigenous cases are automatically overturned is false.
To piggyback on what these gentlemen said, I have some data I wanted to share comparing the number of cases Oklahoma claimed could be impacted or would be overturned to what we know has actually happened. Before I share that data, I just want to say that even though it's a small number for those victims and those victims' families, it is significant. So while it's not statistically significant, I think we just have to keep in mind that behind each number, there are victims of crime. So in the years, because there was first the Murphy case and then the McGirt case, and now post-McGirt, Oklahoma is still making these claims, you can see that the number of cases Oklahoma has said would be impacted has actually grown exponentially. So their first estimate was hundreds or thousands, in the McGirt oral arguments, they claimed it could be over 3,000. And then many of you might be aware that Governor Stitt around last spring started saying that it was 76,000, which they put in their petition to the cert for this Castro case that's going to the Supreme Court next month that could limit the scope of McGirt. I think it's important just to lay some groundwork about what kind of cases Oklahoma is talking about. So they're talking about past convictions, so that's not crimes that are happening now or crimes that have happened since the McGirt ruling in 2020. They're cases where the inmate in Oklahoma, their conviction has been finalized and they have to do a process that's called an application for post-conviction relief. And what happened within Oklahoma courts after the McGirt decision was that there was confusion about whether or not people could even get relief if their conviction was old, basically. And so there was a decision from the Oklahoma Court of Criminal Appeals last spring that said, yes, you can get relief, and that was the Bossy decision. And then another decision happened in August and the Bossy decision was stayed, so it was only in effect for like a few weeks, and then the stay was lifted, and then it was in effect for a couple days. And then there was another decision called Matloff v. Wallace that said, nope, if you did not bring up the reservation argument on your direct appeal, like right after you were convicted, you're out of luck. And so the door has basically closed on past convictions getting overturned. I got data from the Oklahoma Department of Corrections to see, okay, so during that window of time where Oklahoma courts were saying you could get relief, how many people got it? And what we found is that 68 people had actually been released from incarceration to the street. About 120 people had been released from Oklahoma's custody to either the federal or tribal custody. So their Oklahoma conviction was overturned, but they were being retried in federal or tribal court. What's really interesting about that 68 number is that it's actually going down, because what Oklahoma prosecutors are doing, I don't know if you guys have heard about the Kimberly Graham case, but this is happening in her case, is that they're saying, oops, that order where we vacated your sentence, that was a mistake. And they're going back and they're trying to get those people back in prison, especially for more serious crimes. And so we looked at the dockets of those 68 cases, and we found that so far 4 of the 68 are already back in Oklahoma's custody. 8 have had an order from a court saying that their sentence, I should say, is reinstated. And in 23 cases, Oklahoma DAs have started that process. So for all of the hyperbole about all these past convictions getting overturned and people being released, it looks like there's about 33 people who are out of Oklahoma custody and not facing any other charges or any other criminal process, which is a low number compared to the thousands or tens of thousands Oklahoma estimated. And I just want to say, too, I did some of that reporting in collaboration with a reporter named Allison Herrera, who's the Indigenous Affairs correspondent at KOSU, and we're publishing an article for The Atlantic that'll come out in a couple weeks that has a little bit more of that background. But basically, we even tried to find, I asked every district attorney in the counties, the 30 some odd counties impacted by McGirt, how many applications for post-conviction relief did you even get? And it was less than 2,000. So, and I'll end my comments there.
Thank you very much. And we will be serving to keep the pace of the conversation going today. We do appreciate all of your input. And now would you like to move on to the second question? Would you like to give any?
Sure. Okay. Before I do, I just want to just for myself remind myself that the 2 cases that we're talking about, the Patrick Murphy case and Jensen McGirt, that they involve the Stewie Creek families, and so I just want for them to know that I have feelings for them in this case, both the victims and the families as they grieve and overcome some of the trauma of these cases. And so I don't take very seriously my responsibility in speaking about the cases, and hope any families here that they'll take it in that way and not be harmed in any way. If you are, please let me know. If I could make a couple of remarks regarding the Major Crimes Act. As the tribe got involved in first the Murphy appeal to the 10th Circuit, the Major Crimes Act was a central part of the case. It was 11 crimes originally that were part of that. And secondly, that Mr. Murphy wasn't, in his attorneys weren't seeking to have him released from prison at all. He had been convicted of first-degree murder, received a death sentence in McIntosh County. So they were seeking, now he did have an appeal, a year or so after his first conviction to have it overturned. That was denied. At this point, his plea was to not have a death sentence, but have life in prison. So he was never seeking to be released. So I think that the mythology, I guess, of this case, that's where it begins to be overtaken. We all know that the word on the street was everybody's going to be turned loose, Indian country's going to be an outlaw state, and all this stuff. So one of the things that we had to do as a tribe was to try to tamp that down by facts. We were aware of the cases that the state was citing. Some of those went back to statehood. So, those people long since have been deceased, yet they were citing those numbers to the court of cases that people were going to be released. And so we had to, our staff and the Attorney General's office had to go back and subtract those cases from the numbers that they were citing and do the best that they could and do an internal count from their knowledge of cases that could be reality that Rebecca was citing earlier. But you were fighting this trend of people who wanted to provide the scare of the case. And so they were getting the leverage from the news media that, this thing's going to be, people just let go. This was not the case. That argument was even tried before the Supreme Court, and the attorney that was arguing the case before the Supreme Court was, basically shut down on that issue because it relied upon misstatement of facts. And so, to their credit, the justices of the Supreme Court had done their homework. They were well versed in the actual numbers and didn't let the argument proceed at all in the argument before the Supreme Court. After the decision, and moving on to where we are today, we did see action by some of the district attorneys, some law enforcement, and some of the judges in releasing prisoners. I thought that was very insensitive to justice for the people of the state of Oklahoma, because it didn't have to occur at all. I know I've talked to several judges, judges are friends of mine, and they were trying to figure out a way that they could have a conference on some of these cases that were in question, so that the prisoners would not be released. But I can mention the counties, but there are several counties within Muskogee Creek Nation where they felt that more benefit would come to them if they released them, because then they would get the press of, look how terrible things are, as opposed to trying to mitigate this to where they could hand them off to the tribe or the federal court system so that they could be tried on the federal side. So a lot of this activity was done by people that had other agendas than what we were trying to do in proceeding with the case through the courts. And so I just wanted to bring that out. Again, go back to the major crimes. That was the focus of the case. And the case was kind of constricted to several concise arguments, major cases being one of those arguments. And to the credit of the attorneys that brought both cases before the Supreme Court, they were able to maintain that focus on those issues, and I think that worked to the advantage of the decision that came out in 2020.
Okay, thank you very much for that. This next question will be addressed to Chief Floyd, but after his response, the rest of you are welcome to give yours. The second question is, how was the 1866 treaty used to influence the U.S. Supreme Court's rule that the reservation was never disestablished? What other aspects of the 1866 treaty are being affected by the McGirt decision?
Thanks for the question. The Treaty of 1866, the Muskogee Creek Nation Treaty of 1866, was a central part of both the Murphy and McGirt cases. In both cases, the foundation was set upon the treaty because the treaty determined the reservation status of the tribe in 1866. And so by going back to that, The question then became, what happened to that? If you look at the arguments that the state made, they said subsequent legislation kind of either distinguished or diminished the reservation, and they applied those arguments at every step through the circuit court, to the Supreme Court, and weren't effective. The reason that I think that that the tribe prevailed on that argument before the court was that I know that the Attorney General's office and the outside counsels in both the cases looked at previous cases. One of the cases was a solemn case. I think it was 2014 or something like that. That case, although it was a Dakota case, had an effect upon our case because it was basically a reservation status case, and the court ruled that it had not been diminished and held a strict standard for what diminishment would be. And that strict standard was that it had to be exact language diminishing the reservation. That never occurred in our case, and so we always felt confident that we'd prevail based upon the facts of the law, because the facts of the law are solemn, and the fact that our reservation had never been diminished held true from 1866 to present. And so we were able to, not we, but the attorneys representing the tribe and representing the two cases of both Murphy and McGirt were able to sustain that point and keep it intact and keep that argument intact throughout the various steps. And to me, that was a critical part of it. Now we can talk about the treaty and the other articles of it and what it could bring, but I think that's speculation at this point in terms of the case. By focusing on the fact that it was never diminished or altered in any way by Congress, remains true today. Now, during the time before, or I suppose say surrounding the argument of the case in 2018 in Washington, both the Senate and House had drafted language to revise, to show that Congress is acting, I guess Congress is acting to change the reservation status, and eventually a law by Tom Cole, or act by Tom Cole, actually a bill by Tom Cole, was introduced, but as we said here today, it's not had a hearing, it has no co-sponsors, it's not been introduced in the Senate, only in the House. So again, we always just remind ourselves that our reservation remains intact. It's never been diminished. No action by Congress has ever changed it since 1866.
Thank you for that. Does anyone else would like to answer?
I would like to. And Chief Floyd's response was very accurate. I wasn't involved in detail with the attorneys handling the case at that time, but I would take this audience back to a time pre-statehood, the actual execution of the treaty. I think questions have to be asked. What was the intent of that treaty? Was it intended to forever be a home of the Muskogee people? Or was it intended to be chiseled away through legislative acts up to the point of statehood, and then eventually moving forward to more modern times? I think the question is that, was it intended to be open or closed? Reservation in perpetuity for the Muskogee people. I can offer this in the early 90s, our Light Horse Department. Miss Leah Harjo Ware today is a Supreme Court Justice. She counseled us, and the directive was, you respond regardless of the land status to any call from our people. And moving forward, policy changed, political climates changed, but that was very clear message. And I think, not to paraphrase Supreme Court Justice Gorsuch, he identified that This was intended to be a home for the Muskogee people in perpetuity. We gave up the western half of the Muskogee Nation. That ran all the way to then it was the Mexico boundary. Today it would be the Texas Panhandle, all the way to the west. So that trade that our leaders made, out of necessity, I would guess, preserved our reservation. And the courts recognized as much with this decision.
Thank you. Anyone else?
I would just add that to what both these gentlemen said is that during the period of allotment, Congress started that process by wanting a legal process that would have ended the reservations. They wanted cession, but our tribes at that time had strong enough governments and said no, and so then Congress negotiated allotment. And so I think that it's the resistance and the strength of our tribal governments at that time around statehood and their refusal to comply with that is one of the reasons that our reservations are still intact today.
Thank you. If no one else has anything to say, we can move on to our third question. This one will be directed towards Chief Phillips. Once again, the rest of you are able to answer after his response. Our third question is, how has the ruling affected interagency cooperation with federal, state, and local officials? In your response, please explain, if able, the jurisdictional situation and political climate before and the difference between tribal, state, and federal authority regarding criminal and civil cases.
Ma'am, prior to this, again, like I said, I've law enforcement. I've seen the changes from then to setting up and then
We had to play, I guess if you will, second fiddle to state. We always had to do whenever, state said you had to follow them.
things of that nature for
State
states.
and with the McGirt ruling, we're passing that. Now
We're
we're
the leader.
So now we're the leader to all natives in Indian reservation. So
As such, before state, federal agencies, they've done their reports, went to the district attorney's office, and they filed there. As with us, when we done our cases, our reports, we sent them to the district attorney, the jurisdiction that they're in. Now, they're having to do their reports against the native or whatever they come to our attorney general's office, and they go follow the process through our tribal courts. As far as working with other agencies, it's been great. We have 65 other outside agencies inside of our Creek Nation 11 county jurisdiction. So we have 65 agencies that are cross different ties with us. We're essentially there in their respective towns, but they change hats. They work essentially in a case with involving native citizens. They'll do the case, follow it through, and they submit it to our general's office. And then our sergeants look over the report, and then they get it moved on to the license.
Would anyone else like to answer?
I'd like to speak a few comments regarding that. During the argument of the cases, particularly with the Murphy case, the counter argument by the opposition cited several things. One was that through legislation, Enabling Act, the State of Oklahoma Recognition Act, they basically distinguished the tribe. We know that for sure here in Oklahoma with the transfer of council house to private hands, even the furniture being, they use those types of arguments and that specific examples showing that they just wiped us out. So they said, not only did they wipe out the tribe, but at this point, they're incapable of administering anything. So what Chief Phillips just talked about was, we wanted to make sure, and they were doing a great job of interagency agreements, so to show that the protection of the citizens within the Muskogee Creek Nation was strong, that there was a network safety net in place so that law enforcement could work, so that everybody's safety was paramount. And that system, and that argument in support of the case held because we were able to cite at the Supreme Court arguments. Deputy Chief Wind and Chief Hawkins were in attendance, demonstrated to the public and to the justices that we have law enforcement right here with us. And so I think that made a great impression upon the justices that they considered this case, the fact that these things were working, that that the public safety of all citizens within the Muskogee Creek Nation was being taken seriously, and the arguments that this had all been distinguished and nothing existed were really shot down. So I think that was a very effective point that was made by these agreements, and they've continued to be expanded since the McGirt decision.
Okay. Thank you. Anyone else?
I would add to that.
These agreements with multiple jurisdictions is not a new concept. The media and other political bodies made it sound as though the world was going to end. In the early days of our horse. Let me back up real quick. Chief Floyd mentioned that we demonstrated we had law enforcement all the way up to the Supreme Court, correct? That is not only symbolic, but it's even more symbolic because National Council Act 89-148 created our law enforcement body. So that was in 1989. We didn't actually assume those responsibilities until about 4 years later. And it was a difficult transition working with multiple jurisdictions. But we were able to do that. And over time, demonstrate that we don't exist just for our people. That is our primary body we serve. But we're impactful to all the communities within the Creek jurisdiction. Also at that time, we were considered pardon the phrase, but a checkerboard jurisdiction where we had bits and pieces of authority. Today, we actually have authority, nearly 3.2 million acres. Those are, in my opinion, the high point of struggles of past leadership to hang on. Our tribe, our members, our ancestors held more restricted acres than our neighboring sister tribes. Collectively, we have hundreds of thousands of acres that still belong to our people, pre-McGirt. And that struggle of a number of things, property ownership, jurisdiction, judicial systems, it's not new. It's a work in progress. And I think to best address this situation regarding agreements, it's important to know that we have worked on these things for 30 years. And there's also challenges with that. All political entities face change of leadership and policy. But this now will not change. The Supreme Court decision is the highest this country face, and 3.2 million acres is what we have jurisdiction on. So I think it's imperative we work harder with our partners, reemphasize the importance of partnership, and not limit it to us versus them. We share communities. As I said, I think in '66 the treaty was meant to be a closed reservation or people.
Thank you.
I would just add, based on my reporting, talking to tribal prosecutors, talking to district attorneys, I think the sides there's a rhetoric at the top that the decision has caused chaos, but I think whether it's law enforcement or prosecutors, the people on the ground are figuring it out, and that there are pockets where there might be resistance, but there's also a lot of local cooperation between the tribes and between Oklahoma agencies. I also wanted to bring up the question asked about how it shifts civil jurisdiction. And the Murphy and McGirt cases were both about criminal jurisdiction. And so what happens to civil jurisdiction is still something that's part of ongoing litigation. And I think personally will take a while for us to figure out. But there was one court case that I actually wanted to point to. So right after the decision, the Department of Interior assumed jurisdiction over surface mining on the reservations, which is usually the Department of Interior regulates mining and other things on reservations. And Oklahoma sued. They wanted to maintain regulation over that. And a federal court shut Oklahoma down. And so that's one area of civil jurisdiction where we've seen the McGirt Supreme Court decision have broader implications. I think there are other possible implications for regulation, taxation, and so we'll see those things probably come out in future court cases. But yeah, just to reemphasize, I mean, I think what we hear from these leaders who are leading the governments, there was already a lot of cooperation before the decision, and there continues to be where both those Oklahoma agencies and our tribal governments have those good relationships.
All right, thank you all for your insightful answers. Right now, we're going to be taking a 15-minute break, and we'll come back during that time. Thank you.
You can find restrooms at either end of the hallway, just outside these doors. And the Q&A will proceed after our next 3 questions.
Thank you. Very good.
Oh yeah, I think it's
45 minutes, this will go quick.
to answer after she has. Our fourth question is, what are the present implications you have seen and future changes you predict regarding tribal nation sovereignty due to the ruling?
Well, thank you. I think it's a really good and really important question. I just want to start by qualifying what I said at the end. I kind of rushed through it, but one thing I should have mentioned about civil jurisdiction is that it is even where we have reservations, it's extremely limited by decisions from the Supreme Court. And so even if we have subsequent court cases that impact civil jurisdiction, it's not like we'll automatically have regulatory authority. I think the most immediate impact of the McGirt decision is that it helped other tribes gain reservation status, including mine, Cherokee Nation. And so, the Supreme Court's decision in July of 2020 actually only applied to the reservation of Muskogee Nation. And so your tribe won that fight, won your reservation status, and it gave us the highest court precedent to then go and fight for our reservations. And so I think that's a testament to the leadership of people like Chief Floyd and the current administration under Chief Hill, and just the power and the resistance of Muskogee people. And so the reservations of, the 4 other of the 5 tribes were upheld by the Oklahoma Court of Criminal Appeals in April and March of 2021, so almost a year after is how long it took. And then the Quapaw tribe actually had their reservation upheld by Oklahoma courts last October. And then to think about the McGirt decision in the big picture, a lot of people were almost immediately talking about it as one of the most consequential decisions for Native rights of the century and 50 years and decades. And I agree with that statement. I think what has happened for most of the history of the United States is that our indigenous nations have lost land under the U.S. government and under the colonial set of laws. So before the McGirt decision, there were only 55 million acres that were recognized as tribal land. And since the McGirt decision and the subsequent decisions in Oklahoma, that number has risen to 74 million. It's a really significant increase. And what's ironic about the McGirt decision is that it's not new law. Gorsuch didn't come up with a new rule. They just took the laws that exist and applied them fairly to tribes. And what's new about that is that so often that doesn't happen. And I just want to share one of my favorite quotes from the decision where Gorsuch is kind of talking about that, how even though treaties under the Constitution are the law of the land, they are so not often followed. And he wrote, "None of these moves would be permitted in any other area of statutory interpretation. And there is no reason why they should be permitted here." And he's kind of talking about Oklahoma's argument that, this would cause chaos. And then he goes on to say, that would be the rule of the strong, not the rule of the law. And I feel like will be the legacy of McGirt, is that it's time for U.S. courts to follow the law when it comes to Native rights.
Yep. Thank you. Would anyone else like to answer?
Sure, if I could just see if you, go ahead. The implications I guess are still to be determined because it was a criminal case, didn't address civil issues. But that's kind of the next room I guess the case may go into. It's hard to say. The decision of Murphy and McGirt was really based on previous decisions, and so what Rebecca was talking about since then, the other cases, they've been citing Muskogee Creek case law and the Murphy case and McGirt precedents because it's a Supreme Court decision. And so we're going to see more of that develop. I've been pleased to see that in other states, other reservations have been restored or recognized. And so I think that's very helpful. And I think the work that was done here has helped set the stage for those that have occurred recently and those that will occur in the future. I think that the other thing that was raised is just to talk about trust land, and Jeff talked about that as well. Muskogee Creek Nation of the 5 tribes holds more original trust land than any of the other 4 tribes. yet we only have 3% of the original allotted land that's been able to be maintained. Now, during the time of our case, as it was going forward, we also had the Stigler Act that was going on. And so when we go to Washington, we were lobbying them about the passage of the Stigler Act, but some of the same people who opposed Murphy were in opposition to the Stigler Act passing, because what it did was solidify the process and took out the blood quantum for the transfer of trust property from one generation to the next. And so the 5 tribes were the only 5 tribes in the United States that had a blood quantum requirement. So for us to get that in, I think, December 2018 was a big deal. So as the case was moving forward, we were also having to kind of fight on some other issues in the Stigler Act, and trust property was a significant one, but they kind of fit hand in glove with the decision that we got out of McGirt, because we need that. We need a process for making sure that we have additional lands placed into trust in the future. I think there's a window of time right now when that is going well for tribes, but it wasn't too long ago, and it was during the Trump administration where through the Department of the Interior, they had like a hard rule that if the land was not on the reservation, they would not take anything into trust. And so when we bought land in the state of Georgia, that's going to be a fight to put that into trust, and almost impossible under the previous administration. But it fit into what we needed to strengthen the nation. So in addition to getting that decision and getting the Stigler Act passed, it really begins to help our tribe and others, particularly the other 4, with the maintaining this trust property.
Okay, thank you. Anyone else would like to answer?
So the question dealt with predicting future impacts of tribal sovereignty. I think Chief Floyd and Ms. Nagel hit on it very accurately. I would add the legislation to change the blood quantum. That has been a process that has been around for many tribal leaders, chiefs, many administrations. And what I would predict with the decision and the future sovereignty of the Muskogee people is that we become stronger, not individually, but collectively with our sister tribes, the other 4 of the 5 tribes. I think we can empower our people to rise up. We can assume responsibilities and roles in areas that we had been prohibited from previously. So certainly the changing of the Stigler Act was significant. It used to require you be half-blooded or more, and that is a divisive process applied to our people, designed to erode the sovereignty of tribal government. That's not a problem anymore. Chief Floyd's right. We have an opportunity to move into the next era of reclamation. We can capture more things today than we could under his administration. But it won't happen overnight, and it won't happen just because of one individual's effort. We have to understand the issues and work together, continue that continuity of moving forward with remembrance of the struggles our ancestors faced in hanging on to what we have today.
Thank you. Okay. Moving on to our 5th question, Mr. Fife. This one asks, has this ruling raised or lowered the level of respect and recognition for tribal nations among the general populace of Oklahoma, the United States, and international countries?
Thank you. That's an excellent question. I think the respect and recognition, I'll reach to the local level of our tribe. I think it has existed. Go back to the 70s. it was recognized that we were a political force. Over time, we grew. Each administration continuing to build upon the last. That leads us to national recognition. We're the fourth largest tribe in North America. That alone gives us a position at the table. But now, internationally, I think there's new light shed on tribal governments from an international standpoint, which will create opportunities for the nation in years to come. The respect given to tribal governments. I want to be careful with this question because it's not to disrespect any other governments, but it has not always been present. And that could be policy matter or administrative matter from outside entities. But the core of the Muskogee Nation has remained intact, even in a period where the state says, no, you don't exist. We do exist. We did exist. We've always existed. And moving forward, we will continue to exist and grow.
Thank you. Would anyone else like to respond?
As far as the level of respect, I've been afforded the chance to meet with all the chiefs of police from all tribes, all 5 of the tribes. Prior to Chickasaw Nation getting theirs, I believe theirs was Boston. When I was speaking with Chief Manning, and speaking with him and the other chiefs, they were telling us they're watching myself and our Light Horse Police Department. And when they said they get their reservations, should they get them back, which they have, they said, set the bar high, Chief, because we're watching you. And I'm thankful that that's my heart for Chief of the Muskogee.
Thank you. Okay. If no one else would like to answer, then would you guys like to make any closing statements before we begin our Q&A?
I think the meeting here today collaboratively is good, and my hat's off to you ladies. It's been kind of recognized. So,
I would echo the same sentiments. This opportunity is a great opportunity to share with our student body the leadership within our nation, the opportunities that are ahead of us. And I would say this to all of our students: I encourage you to continue. Omega Southeast, keep going. We have an opportunity now. This institution was a product of planning from 1978, 79, 80, and adopted eventually into law under Chief Ellis. So it took us a long time to get here. But your organization skills, your leadership to step up and encourage this dialogue is appreciated.
I'd like to just also echo what's been said and kind of reflect back as well. You know, in the 70s, the vision of the college was on paper. You know, we set a planning document, said one day it's going to be, but to be sitting in a room like this, having a college and having an honor society within college, would bring people together and kind of have a fireside chat about something I never imagined. I just didn't think, it just wasn't in my thinking, but I think it's a huge, I think, honor that you're due for the work that you've done. Keep doing it. Just as we talked about the case and responsibility that now comes with the decision, the same thing comes with the college. It's great to have the college. Now you need to continue to progress just like the tribes progressed over the years, as was talked about in some of the previous answers. And I wish you the best. And you always have our support, and it's great to be here.
Ditto.
I just want to echo that and say thank you so much for having me as a visitor to sit next to these esteemed tribal leaders. I'm really humbled and really appreciated this panel. I think it's so important for tribal citizens to understand the impact of the ruling and really what it means. And so I appreciate your efforts and your leadership to make today happen. So, well done.
Thank you. And with all that being said, I guess we can get started with our Q&A session. We have mics around, and they will be bringing them to you. So if you would like to ask a question, please raise your hand.
Hi, thank you all for coming. This question is for Chief Boyd. Chief Boyd, can you tell us what steps the administration has taken in preparation for the potential ruling on McGirt, and is there anything that is different or something that you want to highlight that you felt like that you all did well?
I think in hindsight's, you have 20/20 vision on that, and yeah, there would be some things we would do differently. But I think that, and I think a big thanks needs to go out to the office, the Attorney General of the tribe, and their staff, because they did a lot of work. I knew that they worked on weekends, holidays. They were here working to help pull this case together and all the information that was required just to have a credible argument before the courts. And so, a big deal of credit goes to them. The preparation was to win the case, but at the same time to look at other things. And I think there's external factors that was going on only within other tribes within the state of Oklahoma, nationally. So the tribe had a big spotlight placed on it. And so we knew we're constantly being watched for a number of different things. And to be able to manage all of them, and again, for the Attorney General's office to manage all these different things, and sometimes disparate groups, to focus on the case and to keep it concise, I think they deserve a lot of credit for what they did. Now, we also were looking at, we had scenarios where if we didn't win and if we did win. So we knew we were preparing for decision of either way, and kind of had, as I said, we had statements prepared that unfortunately we didn't win, and those that we did. But we knew that regardless, that we needed to have a process in place to plan for kind of the next generation of what the tribe would be. And so I think, during my administration, we had the master plan that showed, what would we all look like here, what do we need to be to carry out the law enforcement, the Justice Department, the human resources, all these different things, and community development programs, all the things that we were doing. But if we had enhanced responsibilities, how would we go and undertake them? And the growth of the tribe has occurred. We had, I think when I first took office, we were like 89,000 or so, and well over 90,000 people now. So the tribe's growing, will continue to grow. And so I think that, as was Mr. Fife mentioned, each administration kind of builds on previous things done. And so I think the same thing's here. Look at what's happened before. It's kind of on your shoulders now. What do you do? What do you set up for the next leader that's going to be here? And I think that's how the tribe's been able to grow, and what needs to occur so that we can continue to address those things that are going to come up, because they will. The opposition to this case is not going to go away. We've already seen more than 30 petitions before the court regarding McGirt, and it's probably going to be 40 before long. And so you've got to not just win this case, you've got to defend it in the future. And you've got to demonstrate to the courts, because the opposition pointed this out. What's the tribe done? What's the tribe doing? They were looking at us And those skeptics on the other side were trying to, take away from the progress the tribe has made. So we have to demonstrate that not only have we won a case, but we've taken that responsibility and grown it to where it addresses the needs of everybody in. And, it's a huge job. So I think that's where the next steps lie. And I think it's participation by all of us. No question.
Would you mind please introduce yourself briefly?
Yeah, my name is Chabon Blaylock. I have a statement and a question concerning my mother's case. Her name is Jeannie Blaylock, with Jeannie Tiger. She was murdered 5 years ago. I'm going through this McGirt ruling twice. One in 4 months ago, and one just last week. My question to the board, and I, this is not throwing mud, this is nothing, this is absolutely a question. I feel that there is a disconnect between from where y'all sit and where we sit as people, that I called up here to get help, to see if there was any lawyers or someone that could help me. And I was told absolutely no by 4 different people. As a Creek Nation citizen, my question to you is, what can we do in the future to help people like me, that we are not alone when we go to a court, that we have help, that we have someone behind us and saying that not only that my mom's voice cannot be heard anymore, so I have to, but only that the Creek Nation is up there saying, yeah, this was a citizen of our nation, and there was no help. And my question to the DA and the AG and to a person, I don't know her name, one that told me this, was how in the world can 2 non-natives, actually 4, but 2 non-natives go onto reservation land and murder, point blank, pull a gun to a Creek Nation citizen's head and pull the trigger. And it was all over the news. It was all everywhere. And Creek Nation wasn't there by my side. Wasn't there. Now, this was 5 years ago, but now since the McGirt ruling came up, the first one that pulled the trigger, he was convicted of murder. The Supreme Court made a ruling of 2020, and things before then was gone. So he's in prison for life. The second one, though, came up. He is now did a new case. I just went last week, and I was there alone, asking them, what can we do? And they look at me and literally say, there's nothing you can do, you have no rights. And that is awful as a human, but as a Creek Nation citizen, to hear that you have no rights, 0 rights, that a non-native can murder a native, and nothing be said and done. And so now, we just had that last week, and the judge ruled that we are going to pass it, keep him here, because I asked him if she rules that it's okay for him to leave, when does he get out? And she said immediately. Free, okay? So this is the reality of my case, and I don't know about anybody else's, I'm just saying about mine. But to get out. Now, where do we go from here if that murderer was let loose? Convicted murderer, convicted, sentenced to life, was to get out. And also another question involving that was, where would be the Creek Nation to be there, or whoever, to arrest that man if the United States or Oklahoma left him alone? Would he be a free man for 1, 2 weeks, days, months? Where would that help be to arrest him and say, no, you cannot kill one of our citizens and walk free?
Great question. Thank you, sir. Sympathies. So to reiterate, that was where, how can our nation
How
support
can our
you?
nation help
How can our nation
their
support?
people in that time where, you know, where we need someone? I mean, if they're lawyers, if there's someone there to help and be by our side and tell Oklahoma and tell the United States, hey, they're not alone. We are here with you. And this, you're not going to create or treat our people like whatever, and stand with these, you know, your people.
Wonderful question. Thank you. Hello.
Mr. Blaylock, I'm sincerely sorry that you've gone through this process where you've felt alone, where the nation may have failed you. Advocacy services. We do have family violence prevention programs. I may misspeak. We have numerous programs. To me, that sounds as though not aware. We're not aware. You're exactly right. It sounds like there's a disconnect between the citizenry and what happens in Oklahoma. If I could visit with you after this setting, I would be glad to do what I can to help you and your family get services that I don't know if that is the answer you were looking for. That's what I can offer.
Help people like me. There's others. And it's in all the Indian nations, but what can we try to do? Because that's what the McGirt ruling is about, right? I mean, we are here looking and see where could the tribe help personally. And I'm not talking about money. I'm
Right.
talking about just being there and being there with us as family in the court and saying, listen, you know, we are part of, we represent Mr. Blaylock or whoever. We represent them. We're Cree Nation, we're Choctaw Church, whatever. But we are here to be there and be some kind of help or some kind of maybe ruling, some kind of law. Help us with something. Because when you get told that your mom doesn't have a voice and the only voice that she has is me, and it is silence, that's brutal. You know, that I had to have a voice in my tribe and I can't get help from anyone. And you just stand there alone. I mean, it's rough. And that's my question is, what can the tribe do from here on out to really look at that? And I would love to speak to you. That'd be phenomenal. And what can we do to start making preparation? And so that the next person that goes through this is not going to go with it alone. You know, that they have help from their tribe and say, we are going to back you up and we're going to help you in whatever, however we can.
Mr. Blaylock, myself, I'm near what Mr. Fife said. Can you see me?
Yes, sir.
I too will talk to you after, get some more information from you regarding this. But if you see the young lady standing right there to your left with holding the notepad,
Yep.
she's one of our CFSA advocates.
That,
And they have avenues that we could probably go down as well. But we'll visit with you after, sir.
thank you.
Excellent question. Thank you.
Yes, I wanted to ask, say that you are on Muskogee Creek Nation, but you're a Cherokee, therefore you don't have a blood quantum, and you get charges in Okmulgee County. How does that work? And they say that you don't prove your Indian lineage because you don't have a blood quantum. Cherokee Nation does not have a blood quantum, so how do we make sure when they're here on our reservation that they're protected as well?
Well, let me make sure I understand your question.
Yes, sir.
The Cherokee citizen is,
He owns his home here on Muskogee Creek Nation Reservation, sir. He's a 100% disabled veteran, and he's being charged in Okmulgee County right now. He is he is an enrolled Cherokee freedman, but that they do not have a blood quantum. So he was denied for it to be held in our court system because of the blood quantum. Our Cherokee Nation does not have a blood quantum, but they denied him and they're continuing to hold it in Okmulgee County. Again, he is an enrolled member. He lives on tribal land, so I'm not understanding why we're not looking out for him.
Okay. Thank you for the question.
Yes.
And I believe that it exceeds my knowledge of legal
Well, I'm
counsel,
asking.
but in general, the state lacks criminal jurisdiction over all citizens of tribes. So I'm not familiar with the Cherokee citizenship issue. So I could visit with you after.
I would love that.
Okay.
I would love it, because I'm perplexed too. I'm first year here at Muskogee Creek Nation. So yes, I appreciate that you went here, so I would love that time with you, sir.
And this is the question you had yesterday, correct?
Yes,
When
sir.
you posed for me yesterday.
Yes, sir, in class, yes.
Okay. I know we went on a different trail, but again, Bryce,
Do what?
I'll visit with you after.
Yes, sir, I would appreciate it.
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you.
Hi. You guys spoke about all the local agencies that have cooperative agreements, but you didn't speak about the local agencies that don't have cooperative agreements. I know there are some local agencies that if you call them, they'll flat out tell you call Lighthorse, which that's fine, but citizens still pay state taxes, local taxes, property taxes. We're still paying their salary. So, I mean, I'd like to kind of have you address the agencies that don't have cooperative agreements and refuse services to tribal citizens.
Even though they don't, again, first and foremost, we're going to come and we're going to help our citizens. I know our officers, we've got a great group of officers, ma'am, that they're going to go to the call. And unfortunately, I can't answer for the agencies that are across this. But as far as our officers, we're going to go, we'll go ahead and work the case, and it has happened. We'll work the case and find out after that case completed, only for them to be non-native. At that point, we turn it over to the district attorney's office. And then from where it goes from there, I don't know. But now, we do our due diligence on our side. And again, our citizens' safety and well-being is our utmost concern. That answer your question?
And we'll take a couple more questions and then we'll close. One more.
No.
Was there a point of clarification?
It is, and that's the dereliction of duty, I believe, on their part. It is. Now, unfortunately, I can't speak to what they're doing, what they're not doing. I can only answer what we're going to do and what we're going to do in response to. Now, as far as I get that, the paying the taxes, you want the response, you want the 911, you want the immediate response. I get that. And the other agencies are, and it is, like you said, I guess, for lack of a better term, on the racist side, what they would say, are you native? Which is their first question. And then they're, oh, yes, I am, or call Lighthorse, and they're hanging out. Now, that's what I've been told by several citizens. But as such, we're still coming. We're still going to do our job. We're coming to help. And regardless, like Mr. Fife said earlier, it doesn't matter who the call is, we're coming. And as far as the taxes, ma'am, that's above me.
And I think that's an important question for the audience to understand. We have several entities that not just this year or last year or at the inception of the McGirt ruling over the history of our government's modern existence, operating under the 79 Constitution, we have had these challenges. It's incumbent on each administration to work with these entities and get these issues resolved. I agree with Chief Phillips. That is a dereliction of duty of any officer charged with the responsibility of protecting the public. And I don't want to be overly critical of the absence of some of these agreements. But as a nation, if we continue to respond to those calls of need, it illustrates and exemplifies some of Chief Floyd's previous statements that we have capacity. We can take care of issues. And that may lead us into a different, you're correct. We pay property taxes. We pay sales taxes. There's a number of things that go to fund city government. And it'll be a difficult process moving forward, but it's each administration's responsibility to resolve these issues. And we are working on those. We're aware of the one you reference and a handful of others.
And our final question.
Patrick Dawson, Freeland, Jeff Pidos, Armando Lugana, Olugi Ohomed, Desan Doyaha Uchiha. Right?
Let me make sure it's on, sorry.
So arguably one of the greatest existential threats to us as a people, and more than that, people, is ecological destabilization as a result of climatic change, urbanization, and environmental contamination. Looking at Okmulgee County on a National Risk Index for pollution and contamination in our soil and our water and our air, we're at a 0.86 on the scale from 0 to 1. How will a reassertion of our sovereignty, even though in this frame more for criminal jurisdiction, lead to greater accountability, the ability to mitigate these harms, to perhaps kind of take control of some of the environmental permitting? Questions that, quite frankly, I don't even know how to articulate. But I am curious to hear from your all perspective as tribal professionals and those that work with the law, understand it, and more importantly, interpret it and enforce it. How you can see this challenge being addressed.
And then
Some of the codes that we have were enacted back during pre-statehood and when we got our laws enacted, our code. So as such, I mean, some of those, I mean, before statehood and previous times, nobody knew that they was going to throw trash in the capacity that they are now. So I mean, now there's a lot of stuff that we have to re-implement and to enforce such laws that are coming down the pipe that are protecting them.
If I could just make a few statements about that as well, is that shortly after the McGirt decision, the governor of the state of Oklahoma stepped in regarding, I think, compliance under the Environmental Protection Act for tribes and said, well, that's ours. And, there was a rider by Senator Inhofe in some appropriation bill several years ago that he slipped in and said, well, you guys gave that up. I think that, I don't agree with that, first of all. I think that, the tribe has every right to undertake those responsibilities if it chooses, and challenge those that I think, my opinion, that they feel are not right. And I think that's one of them. And I think that time will show that the state of Oklahoma was wrong, and the Congress was wrong in enacting that change and overriding the authority of their sovereignty of nations, and particularly our case here in the state of Oklahoma. So I hope that's challenged. And because you're right, that all the issues with global warming and everything else affects us here. The ground temperature of our land is increasing just like everybody else's. We're as at much of risk as anybody else. We have farmland down by Dustin and Hannah. I mean, that land, we can't grow on it in the future if it continues to increase. So something's got to be done. So, you know, I'm in your corner on this. I think that legally, you know, the law's in our corner on this matter.
Yes, you all had mentioned, we're talking about the Treaty of 1866, and there's 14 articles in the Muskogee Creek Nation Treaty. Which article did the United States Supreme Court base their decision on? Okay, and also in the treaty of those 14 articles, does the Muskogee Creek Nation abide by all 14 articles of the treaty? Anyone?
If I respond first, you know, the Treaty of 1866, you know, each tribe entered into a different treaty. Muskogee Creek Nation was the fourth of the 5 tribes to have a treaty. You're right, there's 14 articles of it. The issue of the Murphy and McGirt cases pertained to the articles that dealt with the establishment of land. So you look at the land issue, and that was the only issue that was addressed, because the land and the status of the land was what was that argument in the case. And so, as mentioned before, there's other aspects that weren't argued during the case. Doesn't mean that they won't be in the future, but for the Treaty of 1866, and the court supported the nation in determining that it had not been altered, and that the reservation status of the nation remained intact. And that's the elements of the Treaty of 1866 that were at debate on the Murphy and McGirt cases.
Thank you. And we are going to do one more question.
Thank you. I'm Connie Johnson, and I lived in Dustin. My family comes from Hartshorn, Chickasaw. And my question kind of relates to his, because right now we're talking about the criminal aspects of McGirt. And I just wondered from each of you, what are some other areas? He mentioned environmental concerns. We know that taxes potentially have yet to come up. What are some other areas, and what do you think, how important is the impact of this decision right now on those areas in the future? And I just want to say that I also believe that the tribal sovereignty is the solution, and that it requires leaders who are willing to work with other leaders to make those kinds of right decisions for all people in Oklahoma. I just wanted, so I'm going to say it again, what are some other areas do you see yet to come up? What do you think the impact of the decisions about the criminal legal aspect of McGirt, what impact do you think that will have on these other areas that you can think of?
If I could start to address that, I think primarily the responsibility is with the decision and the authority that was recognized of the tribe. And it's law enforcement, justice, victims' rights, those issues that were addressed and argued under the cases. I think that's clear. And so I think, you know, we had the decision, we've got the responsibility now to make sure that we develop those so that, you know, it's at a degree that can't be argued that we're fulfilling our responsibilities. Now, there's other issues that can be thought of, and I really don't spend too much time about that, because who knows what the next 5 years could bring in any of these other dimensions that could be talked about. Yeah, you could talk about taxes, you can talk about environment and these other things, but I think the wisest course is to work from what the decision had handed the nation and develop that to the fullest extent possible, and then test the others if they so choose.
I'm here with former Chief Boyd states, just have to address the needs as they arise. Again, we don't know until the future. We don't know how in the next 5 years come down the pipe. Maybe as a nation, deal with the mess that arise.
I agree. I think the decision itself was clear and its focus was clear. It dealt with the land base of the Muskogee Nation and its disruption, which it was determined it wasn't disturbed, eroded to any degree, still intact for governance purposes of the Muskogee people or the Muskogee Nation. And with that, it was mentioned earlier, we all have to become more involved. We have to be participatory in the future. If I may back up real quick to Mahaya's question about environmental stuff. Our people, Muskogee, were the best stewards of our resources, natural resources, human resources. I think there's avenues for us to penetrate that midnight rider that Senator Inhofe attached to the 2006 funding bill. It was invoked by Governor Stitt with a letter, issuance of letter, correct, Chief? That action shouldn't have happened. But we have an environmental services department at the nation. It's been here. Leaders past envisioned these things. And I think we can really evaluate, as mentioned, what the decision discussed, what we have, and what's ahead of us. That will require people outside of elected offices. Now, we entrust elected leaders to make decisions for us, but we have to participate. This year, we have to participate. We have to participate in state elections, national elections. We need a voice. This momentum can grow. We have to have the courage to face these challenges and move forward. Thank you.
Just adding to the wise words that Beesman said, I think of the McGirt decision for Muskogee Nation and for all our tribes that benefited from it as a once-in-a-generation opportunity. I think about the legacy of allotment and how statehood just didn't impact our sovereignty and our language and our culture in that one decade. Even though that was the initial hemorrhage, our tribes kept bleeding, restricted land, trust land, language loss. The legacy of allotment, I think, is something that we're still dealing with today. And since the 70s, and since our modern tribal governments have reasserted ourselves, we've been rebuilding that. And I think that the McGirt decision and Hogner and Bossy and the subsequent ones are tools for our tribes that we can really use as opportunities in that work of, reclaiming our land, protecting the environment. I think a lot about language personally and our culture and how there's a lot to do. But I think that it's such an amazing opportunity for both our tribal leaders and our tribal citizens to really assert that sovereignty and to build what we want to build for future generations.
May I also add to that, please?
Yeah.
Another, and that's good information, I think as voters, whether it's private voters or state of Oklahoma voters, we have to do everything we can to make sure our votes are cast. And one promotion, one strategy we promote is getting everybody to just apply for the state elections. Just apply to vote by mail. Just apply. That way you get the ballot 30 days ahead of time. You know that your records are correct. You can use it or not, but it guarantees that you know when it's time to vote. Something that a lot of people don't want you to know. So that's my 2 cents. I'm Connie Johnson. I'm native descent. I'm running for governor of Oklahoma.
All right, thank you. Thank you all for that. First, I'd like to thank our panelists for taking time out of your schedules to join us here today. We really appreciate all that you guys have done for us and the knowledge you've given us. We at PTK really appreciate you. And I would also like to take a moment to appreciate our advisors, Mr. Yates and Mahia Marshall. You know, they supported us throughout this entire time, giving us advice, but also allowing us as a students to take control over our own plans and our projects in mind. And so, you know, we really appreciate that as students. And with that being said, thank you, Kim. She has prepared gifts for our panelists, or, well, we have gifts prepared. She'll be handing them out to you. And with that being said, that concludes our panel. Thank you all for coming today. We appreciate you all.